The third problem with it is this. If Jesus shows up at the end of time and slaughters everybody, we got a different Jesus on our hands. This is a quote that I've used before, but it's just too perfect to ever pass up when I'm talking on this topic. It's by a very well-known pastor whose name I'm not going to mention. He's a pastor of a very, very large church and a large movement, and he said this in a very popular Christian magazine. He says, in Revelation, he shows up, he's a pride fighter, a cage fighter, with a tattoo down his leg, a sword in his hand, and a commitment to make someone bleed. This is a guy I can worship. Because apparently, being able to be a cage fighter is a criteria for worshipability. I cannot worship the hippie, diaper, halo Christ. Because I cannot worship a guy I can beat up. I know, it is sad. It is sad. You wonder how a pastor can't worship a guy he can beat up when he already crucified him. He must have forgot that. But beyond that, if that's true, if a cage fighter shows up with a commitment to make someone bleed, if you're taking Revelations literally, you're talking about nations being slaughtered, well, then we've got a different Jesus on our hand. I can't imagine a picture of Christ that's more antithetical to the Jesus of the Gospels than that one. So Jesus in the Gospel, he tells us and he models for us that he'd rather die for enemies and at the hands of enemies than call legions of angels to destroy enemies to protect himself. He tells us and he models for us how to love our enemies, to bless our enemies, to feed our enemies, to serve our enemies, to pray for our enemies, to do good to our enemies, even when they're life-threatening. And he tells us to swear off all violence, and to put down the sword, and if we're struck, to turn the other cheek. The very center of his message is about this. He even makes it a criteria for being a child of God, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. And so we're to believe that when Jesus shows up the second time, is the exact opposite of that. When he shows up a second time, it's like, he comes and he says, folks, all that love your enemy stuff, turn the other cheek. Well, end of that program, we're going to slaughter some people right now. He does the exact opposite. This is like Jesus Breaking Bad, or the first Jesus was in a good mood, the second Jesus, he's really ticked off. It's absolutely like the first Jesus reveals the nice side of God, but now we're going to see the other side of God, the vengeful side of God. You've got an entirely different kind of thing going on here. Now, the problem is, among other things, is that if that's right, then it seems to me that Jesus wasn't quite telling the whole truth when he was here the first time. When he says he's revealing God. When he says, if you see me, you see the Father. Is that true or not? Can we trust that that's what the Father looks like? When he goes to the cross, can we trust that that's the heart of the Father? Or is it only the nice side of the Father? No, if he says, if you see me, you see the Father. If we can trust that, then he can't be concealing a whole dimension of the Father. Paul says in Colossians 2 that the fullness of the Godhead dwells in him bodily. The fullness, not just a fragment, a part, an aspect, a characteristic. No, the fullness, everything that makes God God, was revealed in Jesus Christ. So he's not concealing the mean side of God from us. This is what God looks like. That's why Hebrews says that Jesus is the radiance of his glory. The brightness of his brightness. When God shines, it looks like Jesus. And he is the exact representation of his very being. The word there is hypostasis, and it means essence. It means God is Christ-like all the way down. You're not going to find a part of God that's not Christ-like, Christ as defined in the Gospels. There's no side of him that's different than what we find in Jesus, who, as he ministered to people, gave his life for people, loved enemies down here, which means that he doesn't change, which is exactly what Hebrews tells us. He says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That means he doesn't break bad.